All right, everyone. Um, Welcome to all, and thank you for coming. I'm going to give a little brief on what's going on here with regards to Leket in Israel. Um, but really, the stars of the show today are, of course, our representatives from the Taub Center, the president, Professor Avi Weiss, and Professor Nir Kedar. I think we want to hear from them mostly, telling us how they're seeing the economic impact of the last 2 weeks of this war. Of course, I would say the answer we probably know, not great, but maybe they'll surprise us and tell us it's not as bad as we think. For those who haven't met me before, I'm Joseph Gittler. I'm the founder and chairman of Leket Israel. Honored to be on here with so many of our strong supporters. Thank you all for coming on. For those who just got on, we also have a bunch of Leket team on as well, and headlined by our CEO, Giddy. And it's almost past Giddy's bedtime, so we will make it, we'll try to make it quick. Um, just one piece of housekeeping. And if my late father was alive, he would say, don't say it. But in Hebrew, he would have said, Al tiftach pel Satan. Don't open your mouth to Satan. For those who are overseas, if we get a siren, don't worry. It's in Israel. It's not by you. Okay, so you don't have to run. We will walk calmly to our shelters. If it's only in one part of the country and not others, so we try to make sure that we have myself, who's in Ranana, and Giddy, who's about 25, 30 minutes from here north, and Professor Weiss, who's in Petah Tikva, and Nir, who's in Jerusalem. So hopefully we're spread out enough that if there is a siren, someone can just start talking instead of the person who's doing the talking at that moment. Okay, so that's just a bit of housekeeping. So let's go back. Does anyone remember what day the festivities started up again? Um, March, was it
28th,
March
February.
7th? March
Feb-
7th, right?
February
No, we're
20,
two,
February
February
28th.
28th. February 28th. So February 28th, the festivities started up again. And, you know, I came back the day before. And of course, Israel's always a place where everything can go crazy from one day to the next. But I had spent a couple days in Florida, a couple days in New York, and my message to our supporters that I was meeting was real simple. Leket is basically back to normal. Okay, 95% in some projects, 105% in other projects, but overall, outside of some special initiatives, really things were back to normal. Okay, and that was fantastic because after 2+ years of war, for us to finally say we're back to normal was something we've really been waiting for. And for those who've heard other presentations I've made or Giddy's made, we really don't look at ourselves as an emergency food program. The job of Leket is to help people in need throughout the year. People who are in need in February as much as they're in need before the holidays, before Pesach, before Sukkot. And that's really what we pride ourselves on, is helping people in need all the time. And so, but that being said, from COVID through the war, most of the last 5+ years has been one of emergency. And so, of course, we've gotten used to this emergency um, playbook. So before February 28th, if we had had this Zoom, because we were planning on having an update for our supporters, um, one of the things we would have said to you is we're basically back to normal. We're actually rescuing as much food, if not more, than we have historically, which is exactly what you want to hear from us, exactly why you support our work. And really, the only emergency programs I would have spoken to you about are two that I'm going to mention right now. One, it's not even an emergency program anymore, but that's the loan fund we have for farmers. And that's just as long as most of the farmers pay back, that should go on forever. And fortunately, most of the farmers have been paying back. And so money's coming back. And we've been able, not us, but our partner managing that loan fund has been able to continue making new loans. Okay. That's number one. Number two, I would have mentioned to you, and I'll just mention it now. And that is really, I would say, maybe perhaps the most amazing thing we've done over the past 2+ years. and that is the recruitment of volunteers and the hiring of buses and sending volunteers to help farmers survive. Okay, this is 10,000 plus buses over the last 2+ years. Communities of volunteers have been built around these buses. People who've come day after day, week after week, month after month at this point. I think our all-time leader is a gentleman from Australia who came and went 5 days a week for 5 months on buses down to help farmers. Now, why was that such a special project? Why was that unique for us? And for those who've heard about this already, I apologize. Normally, when you come and volunteer with Leket, anything you pick, anything you rescue, that's Leket. We take it and then we distribute it through our network of 350 agencies who feed the poor. For the past 2+ years, anytime Leket pays for a bus, recruits the volunteers, and sends those volunteers to farmers who need it, those crops are actually for the farmers because we have such a concern in Israel about short-term food security and long-term food security that we understood right after October 7th that we had to do everything we could to help farmers survive. Now, of course, after 2+ years, I would have hoped that would have come to an end. But each time we have these shocks to the system, multiple wars with Iran and just the shocks of the ongoing war, it brings up situations where farmers get themselves in trouble once again, not from any fault of their own. So let's just take now what's happening with these farmers. This is event season in Israel, right? Lots of weddings, lots of events. We were finally getting tourists coming back to the country, and suddenly everything grinds to a halt. And when everything grinds to a halt, yes, a lot of Israelis are stuck here, and maybe they're not traveling, so they're buying more fruits and vegetables. But um, events and parties and corporate events and all those kind of things and tourism, that ends up with much greater sales than just those of us who live here who are making their normal purchases. And so once again, farmers have been hit hard. And so we continue as long as we have the money and as long as farmers continue to tell us that they need help, we are committed to sending them that help. Okay. And so those are really the only two emergency projects that remained come February 28th. And we were very proud of that. And it was nice for us and our team to finally be able to start talking about normal Leket business, because I think that's what people want to hear. They want to see normalcy. And it's hard to always be in emergency mode. Okay. February 28th happened. There's no political commentary from me. We're doing what I think we have to do. Maybe that's as much political commentary as you'll get from me. Um, and of course, we understood once again, our team, that Israel was going to grind to a halt. Um, People were going to work from home, which means corporate cafeterias were going to be closed. The army gearing up again, which means many, not all, but many IDF bases would once again be closed for our rescue activities. Hotels clearing out, events not happening. Like many of my colleagues on this Zoom, I've been to multiple backyard weddings over the last 2 weeks. On my street, where our house serves as one of the bomb shelters in case there's a siren during the wedding. So, of course, these were all events that would have been 300, 400, 500 people events, and now they're 50 to 100 people, depending on how comfortable people are, that they have enough people within a minute and a half of their house to get into shelters. Okay. And so all of this, of course, impacts the economy. It impacts our food rescue. It impacts sales of farmers. And of course, it impacts the rescue of produce for Leket. Because for those of you less familiar with our work, our real bread and butter is the work we do rescuing excess meals, right, from those who have it and delivering it to those who need it. And of course, our biggest project is the work we do with the farming community, making sure that excess crops don't go to waste. So really simply, and I'll try to finish with this, as we are wont to do in each of these emergencies, we made a decision without knowing that we would necessarily have the finances in place, but we made a decision. The poor that Leket serves need to get help no matter what. Okay. And so that meant is on February 28th, Giddy, our CEO, already approved a budget before we actually had the money, but approved a budget to go back to what we call our wartime playbook. And that is in the beginning, while things are really crazy the first few days, buying food cards and sending those cards out digitally to people in need around the country, especially through agencies that couldn't work. Okay, because many of our agencies come February 29th, was there February 29th this year? Come March 1st, went, by the way, I have a good friend who had twins on February 29th, and he tortures these kids. Like he tells them they had their bar mitzvahs, but he tells them like 3 years old, and that's how he treats them. So yes, on March 1st, so we started off with food cards because when our agency partners aren't able to do their work, so the best way to get food to their clients is to give their clients debit cards where they can go to the supermarket themselves. Of course, when you're talking about the elderly who you want to keep close to their shelters, especially in time of war, that doesn't work so well. And that's when we throw the next part of the playbook, which is buying more excess meals, okay, that have been lost. You know, we're down since the war started up again. We're down about 5,000 cooked meals a day. That's a lot of meals to have to replace. And those meals are being distributed through our partners. And when our partners are not able to do that, those meals will get distributed directly to people in need. And the last piece of the playbook is working with farmers to make sure that our excess produce that we're missing um, gets into the hands of our partners. And so same playbook. We went to farmers. We said to them, who's having trouble selling? Here's what we need. We're buyers. Okay. And so essentially for the first four, we made Giddy and the management of Leket made a decision on February 28th that we were going to budget, assuming 4 weeks. We may be right or wrong, and we don't have all the money yet raised, but basically budget about 4 million shekels to do all the things I mentioned, which today is about $1.3 million. Okay. And that, as long as things calm down after 4 weeks, we should be able, that's the budget. If it goes longer than that, we'll have to reassess. Okay. So that's where Leket is today. I think I can say to you that 2 weeks in, with things maybe not being, I mean, it sounds crazy because we've had, I don't know how many missiles and drones and sirens we've been through, but um, fortunately, things have been better than I think expected, which means that slowly parts of the economy are reopening. We've reopened our distribution center to volunteers, lesser than normal. People are starting to volunteer at farms again, but only places that have shelter close by. So things are picking up a little bit. We're seeing a little bit of an uptick in donations of produce. We're seeing a little bit of an uptick in donations of cooked meals. But all that being said, it's just an uptick. So we're continuing with our plan. We're continuing to purchase to make up for what has been lost and to make sure that our partners have what they need to feed the poor. And of course, Pesach is coming up in 2 weeks, and we're going to do our darndest to try to help. Not what we were planning initially, because that's too complicated right now, but we're going to do our best to try to load up the agencies as much as we can before Pesach. We're going to try our best. It's very fast moving here every day. So I've said enough. I would ask people to stick in the chat. Anyone who has questions, just type it in there. We'll answer them. I just want to answer. There were a couple of questions that we got beforehand. I want to quickly just answer them. So one was, how does Leket identify individuals who are needy? And how does Leket recruit volunteers? So it's very important for those less familiar. Leket, generally 99% of our work, we work with nonprofit partners, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, battered women's shelters, after school clubs for kids, you name it. And We work with them, first of all, to check them out, make sure we're comfortable with them, make sure that they're doing great work. And if they're doing great work, then we'll work with them and we trust their work process to make sure that the people who are getting the food are in need. Recruiting volunteers, we don't need to recruit volunteers almost ever anymore. After 23 years of goodwill, our office is kind of like a travel agency all day. There are emails and WhatsApps and telephone calls coming in. Um, that doesn't mean we don't need volunteers. We need people to be calling in, but much of it these days is inbound as opposed to outbound, which is great. And in fact, we've seen how incredible our volunteers are. People literally banging down our doors over the last 2 weeks. They don't want to take no for an answer. They want to volunteer. They don't care that it's dangerous. They don't care that our bomb shelter only fits this many people. They just want to volunteer. So that was one question. Um, Another question was, where are most farm workers coming from? So historically, most of the Israeli farm workers came, number one, Thailand, and number two, Palestinians. Okay. Most, not all, but I'd say about three-quarters from what we understand of the Thai workers have come back to Israel. So it's still a crisis, but not as bad a crisis as it was before. Um, Palestinians have not been allowed back in. My guess is eventually it will happen, but I don't know how long that's going to take. Um, and then the other questions were, so many left, many have come back, thankfully. This question, though, I'm going to read it, and maybe we'll let the professors take a bit of a stab at this after, or if either of them want to now. What food supplies are most endangered by this war, and what alternate distribution methods are being developed? My only comment to that will be is um, is that right now, today, after 2 weeks of this, we're not. If you go to the supermarkets here, I don't think we're seeing a lot of um, emergency over purchasing. Um, the supermarkets are full. It's possible maybe some things are not available, but maybe I'm just not aware of that. There's no shortages, there's no runs on the supermarket. I don't think people are feeling that yet. If things get worse or if things are prolonged, perhaps we'll start to see um, some absences of some things. Um, and of course, if things get really bad, as I've told, and maybe you've heard me say before, I told my 15-year-old son, if things get really bad, he might have to be a vegan. And for him, that's his red line. That's when he leaves the country. Rockets, schmuckets, that's fine. Veganism, that's not going to do it for him. And so, does Avi or Nir, do either of you want to comment on that question?
I don't really have any information on what's missing, but I'll just add to what you're saying. I don't see any kind of shortages inside the stores. At the beginning, there was a run. There was a run. Neil's going to show you some credit card information. I think you're going to see that at the beginning, right after it started, there were some big upticks in the amount of consumption from supermarkets, and at the same time, other things fell. Although I'm not sure that Neil's data is probably more updated than that, and that's basically washed out by now because there really are no real shortages going on. Everything's there. You can get everything, and there are no panics at this point.
So I think the answer is probably there's no planning in place if things get bad because no one expects it. I have a few more questions that were listed here for me, but I'm going to leave those for the end because I think it's good to get someone else's voice going. So, with that, my friend, Professor Avi Weiss, I'm honored to once again be on a Zoom with you. And of course, if anyone has questions for Professor Weiss, please pop it into the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end.
Well, thank you, Joseph. First of all, let me tell all of you, it's really an honor to be doing this with Leket. And Joseph has invited me to do this a number of times before. And some of the names people here I recognize. There are people here who are also involved with the Taub Center, and those, of course, I recognize. And thank you very much for your involvement. Um, and really, the work that you do at Leket is just so important. It's just so central to what's going on in the country. And each and every one of you who support Leket, I'm including myself in that also because I also support Leket. Really, kudos to you because you're supporting such an important um, uh, business, such an important philanthropy. It's really incredible. What we're going to do here is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on inside of Israel. Just many of you don't necessarily have full information, or the information that you have may not be updated or may not even be precise. I come from so we're going to divide this into two parts, and actually Nir is going to start. I'll just tell you a little bit about the Taub Center before Nir starts, and Nir's going to give you some basic data about what's going on inside the countries. The things Joseph talked about that he didn't have numbers for, the number of rockets that have been shot into Israel, things along those lines, and you'll get all that type of information and see what that looks like. And then I'm going to come back on afterwards to talk to you about some of the macroeconomic implications of what's happening inside of Israel. So as you can see here, the Taub Center, we've been around for 43 years, I guess now 44th year already, and we deal in basically all socioeconomic fields. We don't deal in politics, we don't deal in defense, but we do deal in pretty much everything else that's important to Israeli consumers, to Israeli citizens, including environment and health, and of course, welfare, education, health, the macroeconomy in Israel, early childhood studies in Israel. We have a very large center that we look at that. And we're the only real demography center inside of Israel, which is very surprising given how much demography is important inside of Israel and different than pretty much everywhere else. What we do is we produce academic level research, and we make sure that that research is disseminated to the people who need to see it. We are completely apolitical, but we do cover everything. And because of who we are and how people see us, basically all doors are open to us. We make sure that decision makers who need to see the information get the information, and the press and the public. And basically, we disseminate it in many, many different ways. One of the things that we do in order to be able to maintain our good name, and we do have a very good name, Taub is a great name, but we do have a good name in general, is we don't take any kind of government funding, and we don't take any kind of directed funding. So you can't turn to us and say, gee, I'd love you to do this following research for me. We don't do that. We basically look at the questions we think are important to look at, and we always look for people who are willing to be partners with us. Because not taking government funding makes, as Joseph knows, it makes fundraising difficult. So let's just go on. I'm going to hand this over to Nir and take it away.
Thank you very much, Avi. We are very pleased to be with you today and to share with you the most up-to-date picture of Israel during the war with Iran. And in this brief presentation, we will look at the health status of the population. We will provide an update on the damage to homes across Israel and also the number of evacuees as a result of the current war. We will review the scale of missile launches toward Israel and the alerts heard across the country since the outbreak of the war. And then we'll turn to the economic situation, both at the household level, as Avi mentioned earlier, in terms of what Israelis are spending money on, and also we'll speak at the macroeconomic picture of Israel. We'll also see how much the war is costing if we compared it to the previous military campaigns, and what also the expected cost of the continued fighting may be. And how the Israeli also stock market, and not only the Israeli stock market, is responding in comparison to other markets around the world. So let me begin with the health status. So tragically, as of today, we have 14 people that have been killed in the war, including 2 IDF soldiers who fell in combat in southern Lebanon. And it is important to note that this number is much lower than what we saw during Operation Rising Lion, which was 12 days. So now we are with more days in this war. At the same time, we are seeing more than 200 people injured coming to hospitals every day. And you can see also the data for today. So till 4 o'clock, 4 p.m. Israel time, more than 150 people came to hospitals because of the war, and some of them in serious condition. So far, we have more than 3,200 people that have been hospitalized in Israel because of the war. And as you can see in the breakdown here, most of them in light condition. But we also, even if it's light condition, for the healthcare system, it's significant burden to treat all the wounded people from the war. the data that we have now, that today in the afternoon, we have 176 people that are hospitalized, including patients in emergency departments, just because of the war. From here, I want to speak a little bit about the physical damage to the houses. So we are witnessing damage to thousands of homes during the war. According to data released today by the Israeli Tax Authority, almost 11,000 claims have been submitted for property damage. You can see here footage from Tel Aviv in the first evening of the war, from Bet Shemesh on the second day, and again from Tel Aviv a few days ago. It is also important to note that as of today, we have more than 3,400 people that's not the right graph, sorry, that have been evacuated from their homes as a result of the war and the missile attacks. And you can see the breakdown here. Most of them, the largest share, come from the city of Tel Aviv. Another way to look at the situation in Israel is through the alerts that we hear all the day in Israel. At the Taub Center, we are monitoring these alerts closely. So you can see here that after the first 2 days of the war, there was a significant decline in the number of alerts. Even so, Israel is still experiencing more than 2,500 alerts per day on average. Just of today, we are not at the end of the day, we had more than 1,500 alerts in Israel today. So while we have longer breaks between alerts and the numbers are lower than in the beginning of the war, this remain highly significant and continue to disrupt daily life across the country, and the education system in Israel is closed.
Nir, let me say one thing. The numbers you see on this graph, aside from the dates, are the hour, the time at which the alerts came in.
Okay, thank you, Avi. In addition, you can see here maps of where we are hearing the alerts. So here we have the first 2 weeks of the war. We can see a lot of alerts in the center of Israel, but also in the north when Hezbollah came inside the war. But in the last 24 hours, we can see that most of the alerts, they are in the center of Israel. And also, we are monitoring where the alerts coming from, and you can see that since in the first 2 days it was only from Iran, but in the last few days, almost 20% of the alerts coming from originate from Lebanon. And beyond the disruption to the daily life, we are also tracking the economic activity of Israel households. And if we compare, as Avi said earlier, credit card spending in the first week of the war with spending in the week before the war began, we see 50% decline in household spending by credit card. There were particularly sharp drops in spending on clothing, hotels, and electronic goods, while supermarket spending increased by only 2%. In the first 2 days of the war, the increase in supermarket spending was higher, but when we are looking at the week as a whole, this figure became more moderate. At the Taub Center, it is also very important for us to examine these developments at the regional and local levels, and therefore we track this data at the municipal level as well. For example, you can see Sderot on the right-hand side, where the decline in activity was the smallest, and indeed, that area has experienced fewer alerts than other parts of the country. About 40 minutes ago, we received data on the second week of the war. So in the second week of the war, Israeli public spending by debit and credit cards jumped by more than 33% compared to the first week of the war, but still this is 14% below the weekly average level before since the beginning of 2026. At this point, I would be very pleased to hand it over to Avi, who will continue with the macroeconomic picture.
Thank you very much, Nir. Thank you for that information. And what I'm going to do is just give you, like in broad strokes, what this war looks like, what this confrontation looks like. So this is actually our fourth direct confrontation with Iran since October 7th, 2023. Since the beginning of the October War. I say fourth because the first two were actually only, somebody is writing on the board, I'm not sure why, but the first two were only one-night things where there was one period of bombing, and I'll show you what that looked like. And the third one was, of course, what happened in June 2024 when we had what they like to term the 12-day war. So when you think about what the cost is to the Israeli economy, to Israel in general, you have to divide it into three parts. You have to talk about the direct cost, which is the military cost. We're paying people to go and we're paying for bombs, we're paying for interceptors, we're paying for gas for the planes. There are the reservists you have to pay. All of that is a lot of cost, a lot of money. That's one part. The second part is material damage that Nir showed you, the damage to buildings and things along those lines, how many there have been. So there are a lot of them, but the damage we'll see is more limited. And the other part is the indirect cost, and in many ways, that's actually the most substantial of all the costs, because part of the economy closes, and part of the closure has to do with the school system, and not necessarily because of closed businesses, but just that people can't get to work because they're taking care of their kids, and that's what's going on. So when we take a look at what happened until now, so there was the night of April 13th to April 14th, 2024. And during that night, Iran shot about 120 missiles into Israel. That cost Israel about 1 to 2 billion shekel in direct costs, and most of that was because of the interceptors. So the Leket 3 interceptor cost about $3 million, actually a little bit over $3 million a piece, in order to be able to fire them. There are much cheaper ways to go, but that's the one that was working best at that time, and that, of course, therefore added up. When we go to the night of October 1st to 2nd, 2024, very similar, a little bit more, about 180 missiles were shot into Israel, with the total cost being very similar to what it was in that first one. The 12-day war in 2025, so that cost about 20 billion shekel all told in terms of direct costs. That's a much, much larger cost, and that's about 1% of annual GDP. So therefore, that has a real effect on the Israeli economy. When we move over to the Roaring Lion, the newest skirmish, shall we call it? So we know when it started. We unfortunately don't know when it's going to end. But the last time I gave this talk, which was about a week ago, we were talking about 20 billion shekel because we thought it might have ended much quicker. But right now we're talking about it's going to be somewhere around 40 billion shekel. And in fact, the Knesset yesterday passed a measure in which they increased the defense budget. They are allocating another 28 billion shekel to this skirmish. And they just allocated another 2.6 billion shekel for armaments that they need to supplement, to replenish very, very quickly. So these are all very significant costs. So if you're talking about 40 billion shekel, you're talking about 2% of GDP. So that's a really large cost for the Israeli economy. So that's the direct cost. When you move to the damage cost, the situation is different. In those one-night skirmishes, so basically you saw about 150 to 200 million shekel damage, which is a lot of money, but it's not crazy. What happened in the 12-day war was you had 5 to 10 billion shekel of damages, and the reason it's so high is that there was some very, very high-profile places that were hit. So you had Soroka Hospital, which was basically to a large extent destroyed, and the Weizmann Institute, which had incredible amount of damage, not to mention just the physical damage, but it was also the scientific damage and the losses from the scientific losses during that night, during that 12-day period. There was also, by the way, the refineries in Haifa that got hit, and there were also a very large amount of damage. We don't know a number on that. They know, but we don't know a number on that. In this one, the damages so far have not been nearly as large as they were in the past. There have been no huge targets hit that have caused that type of damage like you had when Soroka or Weizmann were hit. But it does add up. When you're talking about, over 10,000 different damaged buildings or claims, you're going up to several hundred million shekel. We haven't reached a billion shekel yet. We may not reach it, but it still is significant. We'll have to see what happens. So from there, you actually go to the indirect cost. And the indirect cost is the one where you have to spend the most amount of thought because you got to think about who it is that's working and who it is that's not working. And so now I'm going back even further. During COVID, we know that at the peak periods in April 2020, you had well over 30%. It had gotten up to like 35% of Israelis who were on furlough. They weren't working. they were still considered employed, but they weren't employed. They were sitting at home and they were getting paid by the government instead of being paid by their employers. And that was a decline of about 10% of the quarterly GDP, which is about 2.5% of yearly GDP. And that's a very, very significant fall, obviously. In October 2023, when the war started, about 20% of Israelis did not work. Now, let's remember that a lot of this has to do with people staying home, taking care of their children. And during the 12-day war, about 15% did not work. And again, those are significant losses to the Israeli economy in each and every one of those periods. Now, let me just show you what that looks like. If you take a look at this graph over here, so the top couple of lines show you the GDP level. The bottom couple of lines show you the consumption level per capita. And if you take a look, let's just stay focused on the top two lines. The fairly straight line is the trend. That's what would have been expected to happen had COVID not occurred, had the wars not occurred. That's what would have expected to have occurred. Israel took a big hit, like the rest of the world. The entire world took a very big hit during COVID, and then Israel came back really quickly. And it came back surprisingly quickly, incredibly quickly, much more quickly than anybody thought it would have been able to come back. In fact, it far surpassed any kind of predictions. And part of that has to do with the fact that Israel was the first one to get vaccines. And therefore, they started to come out of it much earlier than others did. But not only did they get back to where they were supposed to be, they got past it. October 7th hit, you see another very, very big hit. And you do see, and then Rising Lion is that 12-day war. And you do see that Israel was actually working its way back to that trend line. We don't know yet what the size of the hit is going to be now, but it's not going to be insignificant. And it's going to, again, move us away from where we should be. So that's what that looks like. So now let's take a look at what's going on now. So with respect to this indirect cost, so the first week of absenteeism, people are saying was similar to everything that happened during Rising Lion. So if we were talking about, according to the Ministry of Finance, a 9 billion shekel loss, and that was in fact being compared to what was happening in the previous skirmish in the Rising Lion War. So that was about 0.5% of GDP. Now, at this point, we know that after 2 weeks and not 1 week of the skirmish, staying at basically the same basic level, you're up to about 1% of GDP by now, just from the indirect cost. Add that to the 2% we had before, and add that to the building costs, and you're getting up to 4% or so of GDP, which is very significant. And now schools are remaining closed in most of the places. There are places where they're starting to open up, or they're going to start to open up, but in most places they're remaining closed. They will probably remain closed until Pesach. This will probably continue until Pesach, and it may continue past that. And if we go into the ground, and it looks like we probably will, if we go in on the ground in Lebanon, that's going to take a lot of soldiers, a lot of reservists, and that's going to have a very heavy cost to the economy, without a doubt. So let me just sum this up, and then we can move to questions because I don't want to take too much time. Or actually, let me take a look at this. This is very interesting because the stock market performance in Israel is like the opposite of what happened in the rest of the world. In the rest of the world, as soon as this broke out, the prices started going down. Now, why did the prices start going down in the world? Not necessarily because of the direct effect of the war, as much as because of the expected effect on oil prices. And oil prices, we know, started to go very, very high. They went past $100 a barrel. They went up to 110, then they came back down, then they went back up. But you can see the stock market actually falling. In the U.S., the S&P, the Dow Jones, those all fell. And Israel, on the 28th of February, went in the exact opposite direction. Now, why would that be? Why would that be so different? After all, Israel also is a big consumer of oil. There's no reason they wouldn't be affected by that. But the thing is that the stock market is forward-looking. And this is basically a sign of the optimism of Israelis. Israelis actually take a look at what's been going on, and they say, you know what? If this works, if we can change the regime, if somehow things change in Iran, if the level of help that they give the Hezbollah, if the amount of support they give to the Houthis actually falls, if all those things can change, this could be a completely different region, and Israel could be in a completely different state. In that situation, you would expect more investments to come into the country. You would expect things to stabilize in the country very significantly. And therefore, this was a forward-looking market saying this war is actually very good for Israel. It could have long-run implications. Yes, it's going to cost us in the short run, but it could help us in the long run. Where you see it starting to come down again is where people get a little bit tired. And like many Americans, Israelis want to see the results within 3 hours or so. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but they definitely want to get quick results. And therefore, at some point, they started looking at the oil prices also and saying, well, maybe this isn't going as smoothly or as quickly as we thought it might. But you do see an upturn coming back. But it's really interesting just to see how different Israel has reacted to the United States. All the implications for the United States right now economically are pretty much with respect to the oil prices, but for Israel, it goes way beyond that. So now let's get back to that to what I was saying, summing up. So what we saw basically today is we saw fewer missiles that are being fired in Israel now than at the very beginning, but more missiles in the north. We have about 200 new casualties a day, and about 3,500 people have been displaced from their homes. These are very significant numbers. The indirect cost is about 1 to 2% of GDP. At this point, I would put it closer to even 2%. I'm sorry, that's the direct cost. Would be about 2%, maybe go up to 3%. The indirect cost is 1 to 2%. So we're in the 3 to 5% range, which is very significant. And of course, the last bullet here is very obvious, but the sooner we can reopen things, the lower the damage is going to be. And with that, let's open this up to questions.
Thank you, Professor Weiss. Wow. I must say, Giddy and I were having a little bit of a private conversation. Taub is incredible at just keeping this up-to-date data. It really is something to behold. So thank you really for your presentation. Each time it gets more interesting. I prefer, again, when we do it when it's not under emergency circumstances, and when we can talk positively about the economy and the economic growth. Of course, there are people who are. The stock market is fascinating to see. Giddy wrote, and I don't know if you want to comment on this, but Giddy wrote in the chat, does this mean that the Israeli consumer has confidence in the Israeli supply chain?
Oh, no question about it. I think this definitely means that. I think if we didn't think that were the case, we would see runs on supermarkets or runs on certain products, and you're really just not seeing that. You're seeing normal consumerism with respect to food goods, and a lot lower, as Nir said, in pretty much all other goods.
Um,